Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. I see that we were upwards of 180 attendees today, so welcome to everybody on this winter's morning. I know that in Johannesburg we have quite a cold morning. I'm not sure about the rest of the country, but it's great to have you with us this morning. My name is Hugo. I am the head of sales for the legal and professional segment at Lexisnexis South Africa. And as part of my role, today I get to facilitate this session and help obviously discuss cybersecurity and bulletproofing your organization. We have a last few number of attendees joining, so we'll start in a few minutes. Just give us another minute or so. Thank you. Okay, we are at 195 attendees. Let's get started. I know that time is precious for everyone. So good morning to all of you attending. It is lovely to have you online. Good morning to our fellow panelists, which I will introduce shortly to you. My name, as I mentioned, is Hugo. I am the head of sales for legal and professional at Lexisnexis. And part of my role is obviously to ensure that our solutions continue to push the boundaries in terms of providing efficiencies, and then very importantly for Lexisnexis, advancing the rule of law. Today's webinar is the second in the series of our winter webinars. And our winter webinars are where we're hosting a series of webinars with industry experts across different industries and unpacking a variety of applicable laws to you and your businesses, looking at whether you are compliant and what inherently are your risks. Today's session, I'm glad to speak to, is looking at specifically cybersecurity compliance. You know, it's been a year since POPIA implementation deadline, which was on the 1st of July, 2021. POPIA has become a part of our and parcel of our day-to-day business activities, but there are still a few gray areas where we might need clarity. Today, we'll be focusing on cybersecurity and bulletproofing your cybersecurity compliance. Because we know that this is very risky and that at times it could take just a single click to bring your business tumbling down in this increasingly digital age. So we know that cyber attacks are on the rise. And we are well aware from statistics that South Africa and Africa are becoming hubs of some of the busiest cybercrime hubs in the world. So it's so important that we remember that there is basic data protection and cybersecurity processes that need to be put in place from a POPIA perspective, even outside of any actual digital threat. So today, I'm very pleased to say we have three experts in their subjects with us today. Today we have Stephen, and welcome Stephen. Stephen is the founder of Hygiene Advisory. Stephen is an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa. He has an LLB law, an LLM business law, an MDP, as well as he is a certified compliance practitioner with a CPRAC. His company, Hygiene Advisory, and I'm sure he'll speak more to it, offers public and private sector organizations accessible, affordable, and flexible compliance and legal advisory services. And that's Stephen. I'd also like to invite today Jason Jordan. Jason is the Jason is the principal forensic analyst at DFO Labs, which is a specialist forensic and incident response service provider. Jason is a leading authority, a speaker, a researcher, a trainer in the field of digital forensics and cybercrime investigation, and both in South Africa and internationally. So we're very pleased to have him with us today. Jason has served as the head of the Cyber Forensics Laboratory at the Special Investigations Unit, and he regularly teaches digital forensics to both law enforcement agencies as well as the private sector here in South Africa, the United States, the Middle East. So he's a really, really busy man, and we're really happy to have him with us today. So thanks for joining us today. So after our chat with Stephen and Jason, we will then go to Natasha Kirsten, who you'll see on the screen as well. Natasha is a subject matter expert when it comes to obviously GRC and our risk solutions, etc. She's responsible for advising and assisting organizations such as yourselves to implement bespoke GRC solutions. We also know that she helps with the training and the ongoing support thereof. Natasha has 16 years experience in the financial services sector, but in her latter career has gained knowledge and skills with respect to exactly what we're speaking today, which is risk analysis and risk management. So with that said, and quite a mouthful to get us started, I'd like to start our discussion and our panel discussion by speaking to Jason and Stephen first, if we may. Stephen, Jason, welcome to this morning session. You can put your mics on and I'll engage with you and ask a few questions, obviously, that are some of the leading questions that we obviously received, and we know that our people out there are asking today. So, Jason, very interesting. Welcome. Thank you. I'd like to start with you today, if I may. Could you give us a little bit of your background and how you got into the field of digital forensics?
So I suppose I've always just been a nerd, probably the honest answer. When I sort of still grew up at a point in time where I had to go do national service, and I definitely was not made out to be a soldier. And a friend of mine said, well, why don't you go do your national service in the police? They'll pay for your degrees. And I thought this was a pretty good idea. I joined the police to do my national service. And the year that I joined, they decided to stop funding all non-police degrees, so that didn't work out as planned. But I found that I actually had quite a knack for investigations, and they just became a natural step from that point of view to combine, my growing love for investigations and the law with my growing love, or my constant love for computers and technology. And I got into digital forensics that way. I was really at the sort of ground floor in digital forensics. I mean, the discipline only really developed in the early 1990s, which is when I got started. So, I'm probably one of the old farts when it comes to South Africa, in terms of digital forensics. But, it's, we were lucky I was there at the ground floor, and I've sort of grown up with it ever since.
Oh, very interesting. So, I mean, obviously, like you said, from the groundwork right from the beginning with digital forensics, and you've been there. So obviously it's become something that is far more pertinent in the digital age that we live in. So what I wanted to ask you is that managing data and integrity and cyber risk is a very big global focus at the moment. And wherever we turn, whatever organizations we speak to internationally, it is top of mind for them. How do you believe South Africa fares in comparison to the rest of the world when it comes to navigating this specific space?
Honestly, I think we do quite poorly in the grand scheme of things. We almost have this, ostrich head in the sand mentality, in the sense of, we're too small, it's never going to happen to us, or we're so big that our systems must be perfect. So if you look at the major breaches we've seen in South Africa over the last couple of years, especially the big publicized ones, these were not organizations that were small or had no resources, but they had a mistaken belief that their resources were sufficient or their systems were sufficient. And then on the counter side of that, you have the SMME market that believe we'll never be targets. And unfortunately, when it comes to cybercrime is the only crime typology out there that has a 100% victimization rate. The bottom line is, if you have a cell phone, if you have a mobile device, if you have a computer, you have any kind of internet account, you've already been a victim of cybercrime. And that's the reality. You may not have suffered losses as a result of cybercrime, but you've all been victims. I don't think we take it seriously enough.
Interesting to hear, because it obviously is a massive problem in South Africa. And we hear more and more, understandably, of some of these large incidents or these high-profile breaches, etc. Are there any specific breaches that come to mind, or lessons that can be learned from some of these high-profile breaches that we've dealt with of late, Jason?
I think one of the big concerns that I've seen with a lot of the high-profile breaches is we have this tendency in industry to believe that cybercrime is a tech solution. We just go buy the latest blinky box. A vendor comes with some fantastic software, and we're like, hey, okay, we're going to go buy that software. Now we're suddenly protected from all the threats out there.
No.
So one of the problems I think that the lessons learned is we do need to invest in hardware and software and things along those lines, but we also need to invest in our human capacity. Cybercrime all crime is a human phenomenon. We solve it with human intuition. We solve it with human initiatives and human knowledge. You can have all the best technology in the world, but if you don't have effective employees, capacitated employees within your organizations to actually monitor, to detect, to prevent, all the technology in the world is not going to help you. And I think that's a lesson we're learning very, very hard in South Africa, not just in South Africa, but around the world, where we don't actually invest in our human capacity. And that is the capacity that we really need to invest in to actually mitigate cybercrime.
Oh, very interesting. So absolutely a multifaceted approach. It's not just a one shoe fits all when it comes to cybersecurity and threats in Southern Africa. I know that organizations nowadays then ask me, surely if I have cyber insurance as an organization, is that sufficient cover, or should that cover me sufficiently in terms of a digital breach? I mean, it's easy to pass over often the risk and feel that you've mitigated those risks, but like you said, a multifaceted. What are your feelings or your discussion points around that idea that simply let me implement cybersecurity insurance and I'm covered?
Yeah, it's I must say I get a chuckle when I look at cyber insurance. It's became the latest sort of fad, the latest big thing. But if you have a careful look at a lot of these sort of cyber insurance policies, the first thing is they'll want you to do is implement a number of different security frameworks or security mechanisms, obviously to remove risk to themselves, because obviously you don't want to, as the insurer, paying out multi-million rand payouts. And the policies are generally worded in such a way that if you haven't done exactly what the insurer wants you to do, it's very easy to repudiate claims anyway. So it's a bit of an interesting mixed bag as far as that's concerned. But what we are seeing, especially even in the cyber insurance space, is that a lot of what is actually recommended in these policy frameworks still doesn't adequately manage cybersecurity. So you could actually comply with what's in the cyber insurance policy and still be potentially vulnerable to attacks. And we're seeing cyber insurers generally around the world taking a much more circumspect view of what they do, because they have suffered significant amounts in terms of payouts to clients. And then the secondary thing with cyber insurance, certainly cyber insurance can deal with liability towards civil actions and things along those lines against you and damages, but it doesn't always necessarily alleviate damages against regulatory or legal action from a state perspective. Remembering that if you are a victim of a breach and you've been breached as a result of bad security, the information regulator could potentially fine you a significant amount of money. And there's no guarantee that would actually even be covered by a cyber insurance policy either. That would be like taking out an insurance policy to protect you from having to pay fines because you've committed a crime. And there's no insurer in the world that will pay out policies under those bases. So it's an interesting space. We don't really have a lot of case law in this regard. In fact, we've got no case law in this regard in South Africa yet. But it's going to be interesting, especially if we see how, the regulatory environment in Europe has actually played out, where we do actually have some precedent case law.
Very interesting. I think that's important, that often the requirements of the cyber insurance, or obviously from the providers of the cyber insurance, is perhaps not enough. Obviously, are there any additional measures that you believe organizations within South Africa should be putting in place to mitigate their risks around cyber insurance? And you've spoken of a multifaceted approach, but do you have some more detail around that for us?
So there's a number of different frameworks in the world that can be applied, but generally what all these frameworks tend to agree with is a basic practice of what we're referring to as cyber hygiene. I personally hate the term cyber hygiene. It reminds me of brushing my teeth. Kind of thing, but it's just doing the basics right. Making sure that you have adequate systems in place. You do basic security practices. So things like, I'll use a classic example: not running your computer with an administrator level account. It's a basic thing, but 9 times out of 10, everybody runs around with an administrative account on their computer because they want to have the control. But the problem is, if you have the control, so do the bad guys. So the reality is there's a lot of basics that can be done, and all these frameworks refer to the sort of cyber hygiene. But I think what really comes down to it is a better understanding of the risk. And two things that I really want to highlight. One is knowing what's in your own environment. Like you really need to know what's in your own environment. The number of investigations I've done where I walk into an environment and I say, well, can you give me a network map of your entire infrastructure? Like, we don't have something like that. Well, if you don't know what you have, how do you protect it in the first place? And the second thing is organizations need to be far more aware of the actual sort of risks that are faced by cyber criminals out there. Again, because we tend to think of cybercrime as a technology problem, not a risk problem, we try to defend technologically as opposed to defend against criminal behavior. So we need to almost think like a criminal and think about how they're going to compromise our systems and then defend around those points rather than, well, we're just going to assume it's a tech problem.
No, absolutely. So it is actually that it's considering all those smaller, finer details that are perhaps not covered in a policy as such, that you need to look at a multidisciplinary effect or stages, obviously, of that. Jason, thanks. I just reminded to our attendees today that should you have any specific questions, you can post them in our Q&A tab, and we'll get to that just now after we've had a bit of a further chat with our panelists. I'd like to, Stephen, good morning. I'd like to come to you now and have a little bit of a chat and ask a few questions, if I may. Stephen, in your line of work, obviously advising clients, would you say that most clients have a good understanding now of the basics that need to be put in place against digital threats, or is there still a lot of people who don't have an idea as such?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the question, Ethan. So the short answer is no. And to help me answer your question, I just want to quote from an author, a Japanese author who wrote The Art of War. And he says, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, then you don't need to fear the outcome of hundreds of battles. If you know yourself, but you don't know the enemy, then you will enjoy some successes, but you also will enjoy some defeats. If you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy, then you will succumb to many battles. And that's precisely it, Nathan. Many organizations simply don't know what their internal context is comprised of. And Jason has already alluded to that. And because you don't know what your internal context is comprised of, then it's very difficult for you to mitigate against these digital threats. So you need to understand your internal context and you need to understand your external context. So that's critical.
Very important. I think, Jason has alluded to that. The number of organizations that don't necessarily understand their landscape as such, or the finer details of their landscape. We're also referring to POPIA here, and we speak about POPIA violations, and we know that they can often also be non-compliance in terms of POPIA can be triggered by some shortcomings in terms of that are apart from privacy or security incidents. Can you elaborate a little bit on this for us?
All right, Ethan. So one of the challenges that many organizations are encountering is, for example, Section 15, which deals with the further processing of personal information. Now, you can understand naturally in an organization, you find that personal information is shared across the organization. And sometimes those reasons are legally valid and sometimes they're not legally valid. So I think that's an area that many organizations are struggling with. And also, if you look at Section 69 of POPI, which deals with direct marketing, there are some interpretational issues around that. And organizations are also struggling to understand how they can align their business models with what Section 69 is saying. So those are two of the more common themes that I've come across that don't necessarily deal with a data breach as such.
All right, no, absolutely. What I'd like to ask you is that almost a multifaceted question here is that identifying and these foreseeable internal and external risks. How do organizations do that? But then also, in terms of what are the essential inclusions that you advise your clients in terms of POPIA and including in their policies and procedures around these internal and external risks?
Okay. So Jason, it's very important for organizations to do their personal information impact assessments as prescribed by Regulation 41B. So I'm not just saying it's important for the sake of it, but we need to remember that as part of your personal information impact assessment, you will be establishing to what extent your business practices are aligned with the 8 conditions for the lawful processing of personal information. Now that's critical, Ethan, because many organizations have not done these impact assessments. And because they haven't done these impact assessments, then they don't have a good understanding of, for example, some of the controls that they would need to introduce, some of the policies, for example, that they might need to introduce as well, based on the risks that have been identified. So if you do that personal information impact assessment, you can understand with more certainty and detail precisely what your POPI compliance risks are. Now, to talk to the second part of your question, remember a POPI policy, for example, anyone can write a POPI policy. You can download one from the internet and make a few changes here and there. But the problem there would be your POPI policy is not informed by anything. So it's important that your POPI policy is only drafted after you've done your personal information impact assessment, so that your POPI policy can be some kind of a control that, if implemented correctly, can result to effective POPI compliance.
Okay, fantastic. So it starts with that impact assessment and then obviously developing from there on. One of the things that have come up is obviously that POPI Condition 7 says that businesses need appropriate and reasonable security safeguards for keeping personal information secure. But then, as example, Section 19 is not very prescriptive in terms of the specific measures that need to be put in place. My question is how can businesses bridge the gaps in legislation here? What services, how do they go about having the right understanding of the various sections of the POPI Act and complying?
It's a very interesting question, Ethan. In my view, the way Section 19 is crafted is actually very useful, because you say, for example, it's not prescriptive. And I think that's very important, because we need to understand that every organization is different. I like to make the example of a logistics company and a financial services company. These organizations are obviously very different, and they would need to approach Section 19 very differently from one another. But also, if we look at Section 19, the important things that it says are as follows. It says you must do an internal and an external assessment of your risks. So that's critical, internal and external. And then it says you need to craft your safeguard measures in accordance with the risks that you've identified. And then also, very importantly, it says that you need to ensure that your safeguards are constantly amended or improved to talk to the risk that you've identified. And then lastly, it says also you need to have regard to international best practice when you're developing your safeguards. So even though you say that it's not prescriptive, it's giving you very good guidance in terms of what your security universe from a Section 19 perspective should look like, and the things that you should have considered. And I think that's important. And I think that's precisely some of the homework that organizations are not doing. And because that homework is not done, then obviously that creates some vulnerabilities, which you've already seen in the media and so on.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And that security universe and understanding that security universe and your compliance. Often there you have specialist organizations that are obviously real specialists in these specifics. Such as your organization, such as yourself, that they're there to assist organizations to make sure that they meet the requirements. Stephen, thank you very much. Just, I think I'd like to take a chance there. Is there anything that either of you would like to add? Any additional advice at this point? I know we're getting quite a few questions, and thank you. We'll have a look at those questions shortly. But any additional thing you'd like to add at this point in time?
Ethan, if I may, I'd like
Absolutely,
to add one point. I'd like to encourage ladies and gentlemen that let us focus on the basics. Jason has already alluded to, but let us focus on identifying your POPI compliance risks. Once you've identified your POPI compliance risks, do your risk assessment to understand the actual risks that those POPI compliance obligations posed to you. So identify your POPI compliance risks, do your risk assessment, then do your POPI compliance risk management. So in other words, you would have identified your risk and you would have assessed them accordingly. But now it's important for you to manage those risks. For example, if direct marketing is a high risk within your organization, then that needs to be a focus area. If the further processing of personal information is a red area or a high risk area in the organization, then that's where you need to focus. And then also importantly, let's focus on the POPI compliance monitoring. Every quarter, you should have some kind of a POPI monitoring plan so that you assess your POPI compliance obligations and your risks, and you understand that within our organization, these are the areas where we found ourselves to be non-compliant. These are the responsible department heads, and these are the recommendations or the mitigations that we've come up with to address those instances of non-compliance. And then you can report those to senior management and the board. And then hopefully next time you report, those risks have fallen off because you've addressed them. So let's focus on that POPI compliance sequence. And I really think if you focus on that sequence, you can nullify most of your POPI compliance risks. Thank you, Ethan.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, thank you for those insights. Very, very valuable insights. I think what's quite clear is that it is very interesting that you need to have the right tools in place to help you along the journey of compliance. It's an ongoing process. It's not a once-off. It's something that needs to continue. So with this growing volume of compliance data that we have, it really does help to have a centralized system that has the compliance information, which is easily accessible to all the different stakeholders in the organizations. At this point, I'd like to speak to or hand over to Natasha Kirsten, who will be showcasing our Lexisnexis risk and compliance solutions to you that can assist you in specifically this process, whether it's POPIA, whether it's cybersecurity, those foundations are the same. So Natasha, with that, I'd like to hand over to you to take us briefly through that. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for that. A very interesting discussion. For me, I actually want to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. And I think the reason why that is because this topic tends to sometimes get away from us in relation to how much we need to do. So hearing from our panelists to the extent that, we really need to get back to basics. So we really need to start at the basics and continue doing the basics. Actually provides, a little bit of a relief to say that we are actually following and doing things in the right direction. So in relation to the discussion and what I've prepared for you, I'm going to be taking you through some of the Lexisnexis GRC systems that I have to my avail, and also how you can practically put them to use in relation to attending to your governance, risk and compliance in your organization. My particular focus is, of course, the cyber aspect today, as well as paying particular attention with regards to POPI. So the first thing that I did, and I had the benefit of having a little bit of a session with the panelists prior to the actual webinar, excuse me. And that gave me an opportunity to then go back and do some research with relation to the topics that we are currently dealing with. So the first thing that I did is that I went to my Lexis GRC system and I cottoned on to the item with regards to Section 19, and this is particularly with regards to the Protection of Personal Information Act. And in particular, what I then did is that I went into Section 19 of the Protection of Personal Information Act. Now I'm in GRC, Lexis GRC. And from Lexis GRC, what you should know is that these libraries are provisioned with pieces of content that are relevant to your organization, which is what it makes it bespoke. But it's different to the My Lexisnexis system that you may be already used to, because besides dealing with the verbatim information, we also provide you with information in relation to to plain language. We also provide you information with relation to penalty, and then we also provide you with information in relation to at least one audit question. And the purpose around this information is to knowledge up firstly and foremost. And the second part of the information is that we're going to lead ourselves into being a lot more probative in our organization. And exactly what it was that Jason said is that we need to understand our environment. We need to understand and be aware of what our risks are. And a great way how to begin with that is from the research that I've done is that it gives you a great map with regards to how you can deal with some of the probative questions that you need to ask in your organization. Like you said, do you have an organizational architecture, a structure with regards to your systems? What processes or what process documents do you have in place with regards to dealing with information, etc.? And those things are basic, but they make for great information when it comes to actually determining what your environmental risks are in terms of determining what your risks are in your environment. So verbatim was great in terms of understanding the information with regards to the plain language also broke down that information even further for me. And then also the information in relation to the penalty. I could also understand, from a RAG status perspective, how important this information was for me. And then I also was able to go into support of Lexisnexis systems in relation to bringing some related content in, as well as with regards to bringing information with regards to research conducted. And these pieces of information actually came through from the practical guidance systems that I had, as well as from a little bit of information coming off from the Assure systems. So let me just get into that. Let's get the screen out of the way, perhaps. There we go. So the practical guidance system, if you don't already know this product, had a wealth of information in relation to the IT and the data protection aspects, as well as information with relation to POPIA. So both of those pieces of information came across to me, and in particular what stood out was the duties and the responsibilities for Section 19. In addition, what I would then do is that I also use the information with regards to specific forms that were in place and that were available on the practical guidance system. For example, the identification of personal information checklist, or for example, information on identifying a processing checklist, which was incredibly handy in terms of doing that little bit of a background work and understanding what the environment was that I was currently dealing with. So all of that information came back to my Lexis GRC system. I populated that information. And of course, this is a legacy piece of work that I'm keeping as well, so that anybody can pick this up if I then decide to leave the organization. And the legacy system is, of course, built from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, where you would come back year on year and build on the contextual information in relation to your organization. Okay. After the information that I received from the various systems, one of the things that I did was that I went in and I created a report for myself, or rather a map for myself with regards to Section 19, because there was a wealth of information there. And really what I discovered is that I need to take care of the personal information in my environment, one pillar being the integrity of the information and the other being the confidentiality of the information. It's information that's in my possession, and it's information that is under my control. And then further to that, the aspects that I need to deal with is preventing loss from an integrity perspective, preventing damage, preventing unauthorized destruction, and then from a confidentiality perspective, preventing unlawful access and preventing unlawful processing of information. And again, there exactly it came back to the identifying the internal risks, identifying the external risks, understanding what the controls and safeguards are, and then going back and verifying and monitoring those aspects on an ongoing basis. And then, of course, also just a note to say that we need to take care of security practices and procedures in a specific industry or professional rules. Now I get to the good part. because having all of the wealth of the information and having done the prep behind these items, I was then able to go onto the aspect with regards to identifying the risk. So on the Lexis GRC system, leading off directly from the different sections and the different information that we have made available, and the information that I've built on the specific tools that has been made available there as well, I then started to break down that information into its smaller parts until it got smaller and smaller, and I started to understand the environment better and better. So a little bit high level, I started on Section 19 security measures, but coming back onto that understanding of information that I had with regards to the Section 19 training item that I had available, I also saw that I could start breaking down that information into a lot smaller pieces. So on the section, I'd said first security measures, then I went on to confidentiality, then I went on to confidentiality and unlawful access, and confidentiality in relation to unlawful processing. Now, these are still big pieces. I'm sure Jason would and Stephen would agree with me, but it certainly starts to get me flowing into breaking down my understanding of my risks in my environment. And that's the important aspect that we need to get to when we start looking at doing that risk assessment that Stephen was talking about, in terms of doing and concentrating on the action items that then come after it. So all of that nice work has been done. I've immediately identified what needs to happen. I then move on to the aspect with regards to actually doing the risk assessment. So the Lexis GRC system has a risk register that is available to it as well. And the purpose behind it is that after identifying those risks, we can then do a detailed risk assessment with regards to the items that have been identified. Just for the purposes of today's exercise, I will be conducting or taking you through the basic risk assessment that we conduct on Section 19 that I've identified in the library item. So already prepared for you. We'll just give it a second there. Okay, there we go. And one of the important aspects that I can see is the identification aspect has already been completed and done. And then the description item with regards to what exactly are we dealing with in a risk. That information is then dealing with what is the consequences with regards to personal information, the confidentiality of personal information being breached in your environment, the cost with regards to not treating the item in your organization has a number of impacts and consequences. So the GRC system would then allow you to take that information and start breaking down into descriptions, starting to break down into drivers, starting to break down in manifestations, whatever it is that you refer to in your business. The inherent risk item that we have on the GRC system is really great. And here we can actually see that one of the aspects that we can then do is that we're doing an inherent risk assessment here on this item. And we can then access on the inherent risk assessment item key help in order for us to make that assessment in relation to the enterprise risk management or the compliance risk management framework that you have in your business. And I like this because it gives you a clear direction on what has been built in your environment versus the assessment that you're then doing. So there we go. We do an identification of risk. We're looking at aspects with regards to the inherent risk. We're doing aspects in relation to controls. And the controls aspect is actually very interesting as well from what Jason came across, because one of the things that he said is that we need to maximize on the human capacity and the human resourcing that we have in our environments. And that human resourcing, even though you're using a governance, risk, and compliance system here, which is creating a great efficiency in your enterprise risk management, your risk managers, as well as your compliance risk managers, but it's ultimately the duty of everyone in your organization to ensure the data integrity and the data confidentiality that's in your business. So from the aspects that we have under the controls, we give this item a control name, a control description, But quite interestingly, under control type, we also have selections for you to do detective, preventative, and corrective work. So this is already a leading item for you to say, well, what do you have from a detective perspective? What do you have from a preventative perspective? And then even more so, you do assessments with regards to, is that control effective, ineffective, or partially effective? These are configured to your environment, as well as aspects with regards to control adequacy and inadequacy. Who is the responsible person with regards to that control? And that information is then clicked on. Stephen said something very interesting. He said, when you discover something in your environment that is an important aspect in it, do something with it, create a task in it, highlight it, put it out there in bold, and make sure that you follow up in it. And this aspect that comes through from your controls, whereby I can set a task, is absolutely essential, because this is the item that I'm going to monitor on an ongoing basis, or actually attend to and give it to somebody else to attend to make sure that it's actually happening in your environment and is followed through. All right, let's close that item. Oh, excuse me, it seems to have cut out. All right. Closing the item with regards to controls and that human aspect as well. Two of the items that you can see that I'm concentrating on is puppy training. What are the human aspects that we can put? What are the cyber hygiene aspects that we can put in relation to the controls that we have in our environment? The risk assessment item is then a risk assessment item that is done post-control. Assessments can be done and assessments can be scheduled on the item as well. And then, of course, I have...
Natasha, if I can interrupt you, sorry, you've somehow dropped the sharing of your screen.
Oh, sorry. Let me try that again.
Sorry for that.
Sorry. Yeah, let's do that again.
There we go. All back. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to navigate through that top bar there. So the risk assessment item that I'm then conducting is a risk assessment item that I'm applying my mind to with regards to the mitigation controls that I'm putting into place, as well as the aspects with regards to past risk assessments that I'm putting into place. And I think what's important with regards to using these GRC systems is from the knowledge that I had with regards to even assessment, even the webinars, the information that's coming through from Jason and Stephen, or the information that's coming through from your practical guidance or even from your Assure system, and all of that is being put onto your system. I think the important aspect with that is breaking it down into its smaller pieces so that we can actually concentrate and make sure that what we do have in place, that the basics of the basic hygiene that we have in place is actually something that is working effectively and adequately, is being monitored on an ongoing basis. From the monitoring aspect, what's important as well is that the Lexis GRC system takes all of those audit questions that you have on your library, and it then provides you with a tool to have ongoing monitoring or even gap analysis, or even an item for, if you want to call it, an internal audit. You are able to do that on your Lexis GRC system. So that actually works in perspective of taking all of the questions that we have set from the library, and even more so, more questions that you can add onto the system, even more so, more questions that you can add for your own purposes that come out from the practical guidance, as well as got some great information. And actually putting that into a system where you are able to ask the question, has the responsible party taken steps to ensure the integrity and the confidentiality of personal information? You are then able to go in and you can then answer that question as regards to whether you've taken that steps. And it's not just a pie in the sky kind of item, because if you look at the aspect with regards to the risks that's attached to it, you are then able to go in and view each and every single one of those items in relation to how you have taken care of it and how it is actually performing in relation to your business. Coming out of that, you can then go into the aspect with regards to drawing off a report once you have completed. And of course, from a risk management perspective, compliance risk management perspective, engagement with your business is absolutely essential. These reports are triggers for making, for giving you the opportunity then to have that level of engagement with your business, whether it's right from the start or whether it's or not right from the start all the way through to the end. You grab out your report at the end, and you can actually have that very valuable discussion with your stakeholders in your organization. And again, Stephen again mentioned aspects with regards to paying attention to the aspects that's coming out that's important in your business. reading out what has come through from the questions on the audit reports, from the content that you then have. It says a legal audit was carried out. It's giving you the results of your audit, gives you great information with regards to the VAR and how it's performed, and also information with regards to how the different sections have performed in your business. And if you want to then highlight any particular item, you can then highlight that in an executive report that will come out and be highlighted in your GRC system, in your GRC Word document report. Okay. So that is aspects. If we go back to the item that we looked at in terms of the section 19 and the information that we brought out, we spoke about those two pillars in relation to integrity and confidentiality. We spoke about identifying internal and external risks, which is absolutely important. We were talking about controls and those safeguards. We saw that on the system. We saw information with regards to the effectiveness of the safeguards, doing reviews, and of course your Lexis GRC library, if you then so choose, can also be provisioned with other industry practice or guidelines or policies or any other regulations that you may need on your library system as well. So I think if I then look at the full aspects with regards to the GRC system, and this also came out from certain conferences that we had last year, using your tools wisely is an absolutely imperative when it comes to dealing or attending to your governance, risk and compliance in your environment. From that context, if you look at your libraries, if you look at your practical guidance systems, I'm also going to be touching on an aspect just before we end in relation to our SURE model, because if you noticed, I've dealt with everything that was historically or rather currently present in our business. But of course, you also need to deal with aspects that's coming down the line in your business as well. So to sum it up then, your SURE system that we have takes care of aspects with regards to any new pieces of legislation that's coming down the line. It will send you an email to inform you if there are any changes to specific pieces of legislation. As an example, a subject matter area that you can follow is data protection. And fear of missing out is a real fear, because if you miss out on anything, it may cost your business. So this particular item, make sure that you're taking care of all of that information. Your practical guidance system is giving you a wealth of information in terms of being able to be proactive around your business and actually helping you to the process of identifying your risks. All of that content in relation to your governance, risk and compliance system, put it all together, make sure that you're putting it in the right place, you're giving it the right level of context. And if all of that information is your what, your governance, risk and compliance system is your how. And that how is in relation to concentrating on aspects with regards to your environment, with aspects on concentrating on the identification of your risks, on aspects of concentrating on your controls, your aspects around further aspects around your controls is any action, any monitoring items that is coming off of there, and as well as doing the necessary dashboard or data analysis that comes out of that is incredibly important as well. And your Lexis GRC comes out in terms of also giving you information in relation to what are the aspects that you need to concentrate on. For example, how are each of these risks scoring? What is the control effectiveness? What risk do I have in place, and what control do I have in place? What control do I have in planning? If I click on the item that says in planning, our dashboards are interactive. We can concentrate on each and every single item that we need to, as mentioned by Stephen as well. Okay, and that's it, Ethan, from my part. I hope I haven't exploded anybody with information on that, but we are also available if you need any further information there.
Natasha, I absolutely appreciate your time. I think it speaks to many of the issues that were brought up, or the concerns about what are the processes that you follow as an organization and the multiple steps that are taken to ensure that you do comply and ensure that obviously you have the right processes in place for cybersecurity. I think as one of the many risks obviously that are available. I think at that point, though, I know that time is very limited today, and what I'd like to do is, we've had some really good questions, but what we're going to do now is we're going to put up a poll on the screen. We want to put a poll up. What have I done here? So the poll up, if you are interested in finding out more about GRC, please to select there if you're interested, etc., about our compliance, government, risk, our program software that is available to assist you with this. But in the meantime, while that poll is there, I'd like to maybe just touch on one or two of the questions that came in. Our panelists have been very active in answering the questions, and thank you very much for that. But I think maybe what we can do is share one or two of the answers to those questions, if I may ask so, in case people haven't had an opportunity to view the answers that have come through there. So I think first off, Stephen, there's a question you answered, and the question was, what change do you think, if any, does the Cyber Crimes Act bring to South Africa's head in the sand mentality? We spoke about this head in the sand. And can you comment on the presumed effectiveness of this act in deterring cyber crimes? Is it enough?
Yes, so Ethan, Jason did mention a very important point earlier on. So the Cyber Crimes Act, it's useful insofar as it criminalizes cyber crimes. But remember, there's a whole behavioral aspect that's not dealt with within the act. And remember, cyber crime, it's a human aspect, and you need to deal with it on that basis. You can't deal with behavior through legislation as such. There needs to be training and awareness and empowerment of people to make them understand, what is a cyber crime, how is it perpetrated, what should your response be when you identify a cyber crime, etc. Who do you speak to, who do you report to, etc. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. I'm just looking at some of the other questions here, and you guys have been really great in putting together some good answers here. So if you click on the Q&A tab at any time, you're able to view them. But I think let's ask Jason, there was a question about organizations having to adhere to both POPIA and GDPR. I don't know if you could just answer perhaps on that for us.
So unfortunately, obviously, you've got to consider the type of organization or whether or not GDPR and POPIA apply to you. So basically, if you are processing any information of a natural person from the European Union, you are going to have to comply with GDPR. That's just the reality of it. Obviously, there is a difference between GDPR and POPI in the sense that GDPR only applies to natural persons, whereas POPIA applies to both natural and juristic persons. So we have a broader jurisdiction in our South African law in terms of the type of what we would consider personally identifiable information. The question is, well, how do you comply with both? Well, the reality is you have to comply with both. And the advice that I've given to a lot of organizations that I've worked with that aren't multinationals is you identify the commonalities between both GDPR and POPIA, and you have policies in place to deal with those things. And then you identify where there's differences. So for example, if there's something in POPIA that's not in GDPR, you have to have that in your policy framework. You might then have some things that are similar in POPIA and GDPR. So for example, the reporting obligation in the instance of a breach. In POPIA, the Act says you have to report the breach within a reasonable period of time. GDPR is very, very much more prescriptive in terms of by when you have to report a breach. So in that kind of instance, if you want to make sure that you have a policy that's sort of compliant with both, you choose the most restrictive condition and you apply that to your policy environment. Because if I have to report within 72 hours in terms of GDPR, that would certainly be a reasonable time period in terms of POPIA. So that's one way of addressing with it. I wish there was an easy button we could just push it and say, well, yeah, we're in compliance with both, but literally you'd have to look at both of those compliance frameworks. And bad news, America's coming down the road with its compliance obligations as well at some point in the future. So you're going to have to take that into account too. So just be aware of that down the line as well.
Fantastic. I think maybe Stephen, you could answer. Question was asked: do you believe that POPI legislation will do enough to make businesses take data security seriously? If you have comment for us on that.
Okay, so I think generally POPI it's a very decent piece of legislation, but here's the thing: organizations need to appreciate the commercial value of personal information. I think that's where the key is, and the commercial value of ensuring that your stakeholders trust you with their personal information. If I don't trust you as an organization with my personal information, then you can assume that I'm not going to trade with you. And if I'm not going to trade with you, then that affects your viability as an organization. It affects the bottom line. If you look at organizations such as Google, Apple, and Discovery here at home, they've become the masters of understanding personal information, how to tap into it in a legal fashion, but also how to create products and services out of that personal information. So if you fail to appreciate the commercial relevance of personal information, that is when you fall out. And if you fall out, then that's your loss. Others will capitalize on personal information, improve their products, introduce new services, etc., because they understand the commercial value and they know how to tap into it in a legal manner.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. I am wary of time, and I would like to say once again, thank you to our panelists for your insights today. I believe it's been very valuable. I'd like to remind all attendees and thank everybody for attending, that the recording will be available post the event, that there will be communication from Lexisnexis via email, and that obviously, as mentioned, it will be available on the Lexisnexis YouTube if you'd like to run through the information again. We've had an absolute great session. I want to once again thank all the attendees for attending. I hope that the session has been helpful. I know that a number of questions have been answered, but I'm sure in reaching out to us, should you have additional questions, we'll be able to assist with those as well. So once again, calling it there, thank you very much for the day, and appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you and have a further day. We look forward to connecting with you sooner in perhaps some of our further winter webinar series that we have. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay.